My mission is to teach history through art and to make people think more critically about false narratives. I'm Jim McMurtry, and welcome to my classroom. The story that I'd like to look at today, which includes some false narratives, is about an extraordinary young woman who was highly regarded by the people in the colony of St. John's long ago. This is before Canada became a country, and even longer, before Newfoundland became a province of Canada in 1949. So the context is the island of Newfoundland, and it got that name from a king. He learned that one of his citizens, John Cabot, had discovered new land, had found new land, and he decided to name that Newfoundland, that new continent, Newfoundland. Anyhow, the painting that we're looking at today, because we do look at history through art, is a portrait of a woman, a young woman, and she's said to be the last of her nation, of her First Nation, of her tribe, of her people, similar to the well-known Hollywood film Last of the Mohicans. That groups do die out, and we're going to ask ourselves in this brief lesson whether it's true that because school books do say that the Beothuk, which is the tribal grouping that this young woman's part of, whom we're going to introduce in a second, were extinguished, and so we'll look at that, and we're also going to look at what they say in school history books since I was in school, that it was because the English hunted dogs and killed them all. So not sure either of those narratives are true. And so the first thing to do in looking at this portrait is to notice that the artist might not really know what, I don't know who the artist was and when it was painted, but I'm not as an accurate rendition because she was gone long before the artist would have put her face to canvas. And the woman in the picture could be from India, could be from Middle East, could be from Southern Europe. We're all a mixture, and that's something I'm going to return to as well, particularly since the Vikings started raiding Newfoundland and attempting to settle there, like at Lansdowne Meadows 1,000 years ago. So quite possibly, whatever that Beothuk looked like is lost to history long before this young woman lived. So her name is Shauna Wa Didhit, and she's very little place in Canadian history, and maybe she should have a very big place because she does mark the end of something. And so first of all, when I mentioned that the last Mohicans were killed by the Iroquois and by smallpox. In the case of the Beothuk, they too were killed in part by other indigenous groupings like the Mi'kmaq and the mainland across from Newfoundland, but also from disease. And in this case, Tano Wadidhit died from tuberculosis. I stated her aunt and uncle who come into our story here. They weren't well regarded by the English because when the English first met with them, they noticed that they didn't want to trade. This is a people that stayed away, maybe because of past experiences long ago with the Vikings. They didn't want much contact, so they stayed away. And that might have been perilous for them because those that did obviously interact with Europeans learned things and received things such as vaccinations to help ward off infectious diseases such as tuberculosis. And then also in times of starvation, it would have been useful, obviously, to be able to trade for the food that the Europeans and other goods that would have helped to preserve their lives. So they stayed to themselves, but some of them did at times interact, including to steal. And there was one well-known case in 1818 of a boatload of trade goods disappearing, and they traced the boat to these people. So there was lots of hostile interaction. So there is some truth to the narrative about the English hunting and kidnapping and killing. But I think that's a small part of the story, because there are many more English who did things to help them, and they even wanted this young woman to serve as an ally for them and as an interlocutor between the Beothuk and themselves. But she said she could never go back because they had a practice, a tradition, a ritual in which they killed anybody in the tribe that ever interacted with other groupings. So she never wanted to go back after she was taken, and she was taken as she was being injured. She was shot at while she was cleaning deer meat in a river, deer meat called venison, and the English took her. And they took her uncle and her aunt, um, and she ended up living in two different households in the colony of Newfoundland, and in the main village of St. John's, which is as the capital. The fascinating thing about not only was she taken back and healed and lived with two English families, working for a long time as a maid, and encouraged to live a good life, and taken care of when she fell ill. And for a long time, she was afflicted with tuberculosis, and which again she died of in 1829. But the fact that her aunt and uncle were taken is fascinating, because their skulls were taken back to Scotland, and then a long time later, as recently as 2017, that their Scottish researchers started to look at the DNA makeup and the skulls, and they noticed something. And that's again brings us to the beginning of this lesson. Were they extinct? And what they found after identifying and isolating the DNA of her uncle and aunt, and then doing tests of people from Iceland all the way to Newfoundland, that they found that there are other people with almost identical DNA, and not just indigenous, but people who didn't believe they had any indigenous in them whatsoever. So her family tree, and specifically the family tree of her aunt, and is a family that has many descendants. She had many cousins who reproduced, and I could be one of them. I could be a descendant, because I'm part Viking and part English. So they're culturally extinct as a people, but their DNA live on. Some were killed by the English, but the greater number were helped by the English, and were designed to be trading partners for mutual benefit from the people that were living in that colony, in that island long ago. So I think it's wrong to use this as an example of genocide. And then look, so and the other one again, the fact that she wasn't the last of the Beothuk, that the Beothuk live on. They live on genetically, as we all do, because all peoples and all communities live for a time and then disappear. And that includes us. And civilizations come in that are more dominant, and they take over. And that's all part of the paradigm, the existence of the Darwinian struggle from the beginning of time, of the survival of the fittest.